Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome once again to the Box Jumper Podcast. I'm your host, John Sainamon. Today's topic is one I've been spending more and more time researching and thinking about lately. Physical therapy. Not because of an injury, but because in spending more time learning about the biomechanics of movement, I'm finding that the lens through which I coach athletes and evaluate my own movement as a CrossFit athlete is changing in subtle ways to incorporate this thinking. Understanding the mechanics of joint movement, the relationships between muscle groups, the physical forces at play during key movements, I find myself with a deepening understanding of how these factors contribute to the 10 general physical skills we use in fitness: cardiovascular, respiratory endurance, stamina, strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, agility, balance, and accuracy. If you've ever gone to a physiotherapist, you know that they spend a considerable amount of time evaluating your movement, looking for the root cause of whatever the issue is that you're experiencing. They'll manipulate joints, looking for any evidence of an impingement, or have you perform range of motion drills to help identify any imbalances or weaknesses that may go unnoticed to the untrained eye. And often they'll prescribe exercises for their patients to perform on their own to supplement the treatment that they receive in their office. Some will have their patients use implements with which CrossFitters are very familiar: a wooden dowel, dumbbells, kettlebells, exercise bands, and even barbells, all in an effort to build up and restore your body to proper working order, and taking it further still, raise the patient's baseline to provide resistance to similar injury in the future. In many ways, this philosophy is very similar to what we aim to achieve in CrossFit. The majority of us are using CrossFit to better our physical health. An older athlete might be working to increase their capacity, maintain independence, and stave off the old age home. When I load a barbell and do a deadlift, I'm doing training for everyday life. So when I'm lifting something heavy from the ground in my garage, I not only have the strength to accomplish the task, but I've also developed the correct habits in terms of body position and the mechanics of the movement to do it safely. Physiotherapists put this into practice every day, informed by their unique training in physiology and biomechanics to help their patients regain and retain healthy movement. At Osprey Athletics, I'm fortunate. I have access to some terrific mentors in this subject matter. Mike and Anita Connors, both physiotherapists with their own practice of several offices in the Halifax area, are CrossFit athletes at Osprey. And for the past several years, I've gotten to know them and learn from them as their professional life started to kind of cross over a little bit into their gym life. They've become integral members of not just the CrossFit community at Osprey, but invaluable members of the coaching team there, working with the coaches to help us better our understanding of the dynamics of what they do and how to apply that knowledge to our coaching. And they too have been working with the coaches to apply things that we see to their practice. So naturally, I was eager to sit down with both of them for the podcast and talk a little shop. So in 10 seconds, we'll get started talking with Mike and Anita about some of the natural synergies between physiotherapy and CrossFit that they're incorporating into their practice and Osprey coaches are bringing to our athletes. Mike and Anita Connors, welcome to the podcast. I've known you two for quite a while now. I mean, really, we've all been working out together for some time, and we've crossed paths in that aspect at the gym a number of times. But I've never really sat down with you in this kind of environment and really gotten a whole lot of detail on what it is that you do. You're both physiotherapists by profession, but you're also CrossFitters. You're both L1 coaches. And you've had a hand in some of the additional education that has come to Osprey Athletics for the coaches to participate in, particularly in the last little while, bringing together a seminar that many of us attended that allowed us to kind of bridge the gap between what CrossFit trainers do and what physiotherapists do. So before we get into that melding of your gym life and what you do professionally, why don't we back way up? How'd you become physios? How did that become your thing?
I think for me, I had a pretty typical entry into the profession. I played a lot of sports growing up, and I got hurt a number of times. But the biggest injury that I had as a young guy was a fractured arm playing hockey, which brought me into physio for a couple of months for rehab. And while I was there, I enjoyed it. I liked the physio that I worked with. He was an interesting guy, and we had a lot of fun while I rehabbed. So I think it kind of piqued my interest at the time. From there, I moved into looking at it as a profession, and I ended up doing some summer jobs in the same physio clinic. And then I kind of moved forward into my post-secondary education and did athletic therapy at Acadia, and kind of had my eyes set on physio. So it's been pretty steady progression upward. Like many people, you get injured, you get introduced, you have a good experience, and it goes from there. So,
well, if you're lucky, you have a good experience.
Yeah. Which is one of the things that we try to do in our clinic is to make sure everyone does have a good experience, because we saw the benefit of what it did for me, for sure.
Right.
I was not athletic as a kid.
Seriously?
Seriously, nothing.
Okay, so just before you tell how wrong I was about what your past is, everything I've seen in the gym in the last several years would have led me to believe that you were a star athlete growing up. So what the hell?
I was a mediocre figure skater. No, I was a pretty just average kid. I skipped and I did like the average kid stuff, but I did nothing organized except for some figure skating. And like I said, I was okay at that. And then through high school, I was pretty sedentary until grade 11 or 12. And I started to take some aerobics classes in the basement of a church. So that's my fitness background. Usually with 60-year-olds, but, that was pretty much it. So I had no experience with physio. I stumbled upon it. So I was in school. I did well in sciences. I enjoyed biology, and I didn't love chemistry. So I started to chat with, academic advisor, and we kind of just laid out like what are the options in this realm, and I was like, oh, physio sounds cool. so
sort of the spreadsheet matrix of here are all the jobs that apply when you like this type of science but not this type of science.
Yeah, I didn't want to sit at a desk, and that was pretty much all I knew.
Should probably do that with my kids. Well, my youngest anyway. My oldest has kind of already got her thing sorted out, but the youngest is still trying to figure out where she might like to go, and she does like certain aspects of science, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm. See, that's the sciencey way to do it.
Yeah. So when you decided that was the path that you wanted to take, was it an immediate fit for you, or was it just that once you were committed, you were hell bent on finishing, and that's where you were headed?
More that way. Yeah. I've been practicing for 15 years now. So back when I got in, I didn't need a degree first. There was a 2-year prerequisite list that you had to complete and have a certain average, blah, 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 to meet criteria to get an interview or to get in off your marks. And so I did those 2 years of like kind of kines-based courses, biology, physio, stream sort of stuff after my first year, And then I just applied and I got in. So it was the kind of like, well, I'm here now. Yeah. Let's see what this ends up looking like.
Did you guys meet in school, or did you wind up meeting after you were already in the profession?
Year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So what commonly happens with physios when they come out of school? Do you commonly go into someone else's practice, or is it more common to start your own?
I think there's a lot of choices. So physio is what we know of physio is orthopedic physio or musculoskeletal physio, but there's also cardiorespiratory physio. There's neurology. There's pediatrics. So most people they kind of decide within that 2 to 3 year period what type of physios they want to be. We both wanted to be MSK or orthopedic physios, which there is an option to work in a hospital, but we wanted to work in the private industry.
Right.
So we had our minds set on working in clinical practice right from the get-go. I think even growing up, I always I didn't even know that there was physio in hospitals that did neurology and pediatrics. I knew physio as sports physio or clinical physio. So my mind was always set that I was going to work in a clinical setting.
Is that something that you figure you would have been attracted to more anyway?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more my personality. It's more my focus.
It certainly fits with your experience and having been introduced to the profession when you were a patient.
Yeah, exactly. So it was, like I said, it was all I knew.
Yeah.
So that was physio to me. So, I kind of moved towards that clinical setting right away and really never turned back. So started off working for someone else and then eventually had the opportunity to buy out the practice as my old partner was retiring. Mm-hmm. And so then we became clinic owners. So it was a nice progression all the way through.
Yeah. And was that a single clinic location at the time, or was it multi-clinic?
No, we were both living in the valley at the time. Pretty early, and we decided we were going to move back to Halifax. And one of our professors had two separate clinics, and we had been talking to her on a course, and she had said that there might be a possibility of two positions opening up in two different clinics, and we took those positions. So it kind of fell in. It was the right timing, right place, right time. Mm-hmm. So Anita worked in Sackville and I worked in Halifax. And over, 5-7 years, we started to buy into the practice. And as of 3 years ago, mm-hmm. we took over the practice 100%. So,
mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So that overlaps your experience in CrossFit rather closely too, because it was 3.5, almost 4 years ago that you both would have gotten involved in CrossFit.
It would have been 3 years ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It kind of coincided almost exactly, actually. And there's a bit of a funny story on how we got into CrossFit. Both of us were kind of avid global gym kind of goers for many, many years. Mm-hmm. We had memberships at Good Life, and when we were at university, we went to the university gyms and that type of thing. But as we started to take over the practice and we built another practice, life started to get really busy at work and stressful, and our time at the gym was starting to get less and less, and we started to kind of lose the passion for it. And right. I think one day Anita kind of came home and she was training for a half marathon at the time, and she wasn't lifting weights, and she just said, I think we need a change. We need to do something. And I kind of resisted. I resisted because I felt like everyone thinks that they're too busy. And I felt that I was too busy. If I wasn't getting to a 24-hour gym because I didn't have time, how am I going to find time to go into a CrossFit setting, which is allocated times and classes?
Yeah, structured.
Yeah, so I was really resistant to it. And Anita said, well, let's give it a go. Let's try a community class, which we did. And then we ended up making it to Osprey, which at the time was Rocky Lake. Mm-hmm. And funny enough, I kind of fell in love with it and found time, like everything, if mm-hmm. you set your priorities. And I really enjoyed it. And the structure of having an allocated time or a class that you had to attend, you sign up for it, you better go, made it easier for me because I just made it a scheduled activity as opposed to, I think my day is over. I'm going to be driving past the gym. I'll pop in for an hour. Right. No, I had to leave work and get there for 4:30. And if it meant that I had to go back to work after, so be it. But I was able to put my time into the fitness.
Was it the accountability of that class schedule or the community, asking where the hell you were when you didn't show up, or was it both?
I think for me it was both because I didn't want to. At the time, we had wait lists and there was people trying to get into classes mm-hmm. who couldn't get into classes. And if I was lucky enough to get one of those spots, I felt bad if I couldn't make it.
Right. It also made you accountable for not dawdling. I'll have another cup of coffee, or I'll go in 5 more minutes.
That's true. Yeah, you've got that
5 more minutes
specific start time that you have to be mm-hmm. there for.
Yeah.
Or I'll go home and grab a bite to eat, but then find yourself not leaving the house again because you got comfortable.
Yeah.
So you just made it a part of your day. And, I'm probably talking for myself, but I think we're both in the same boat. We really enjoyed it. We enjoyed the workouts. We enjoyed the challenge of learning different techniques and different skills. And for me, especially, it gave me back that competitive kind of level that I never had for a long time. Mm-hmm. I was a competitive athlete. I always played sports and competed. But for much of my adult life, I wasn't competing anymore. I was playing rec league sports and that type of thing.
Like so many of us, that competitive nature that we have when we're younger winds up just not finding a way to fit into the life that we lead when we're older.
So for me, that it wasn't even competing against other people. It was competing against myself and trying to get better at, can I do X number of pull-ups versus last week when I can only do this? And am I going to finally crack the skill of doing a double under? Those types of things were challenging from both a physical and a technical, intellectual kind of point of view for us. So,
it's the neurological component of what we do in the gym is kind of an interesting part of that. I see in my role in being responsible for some of the pre-flight classes, and I get to see every new athlete when they come in. I get to see just how the degree of coordination or uncoordinated they happen to be when they come in, and the changes that you get to see in very short order, even before their strength starts to climb. Just how coordinated, how much more technique starts to be involved in their ability to lift, which we want to see that before we start seeing them lift really heavy anyway. And and then there are others that have a real challenge with that neurological adaptation, the coordination and the agility that is required to move that same amount of weight that they were able to lift on day one, even 2 months later, is still challenging because they're still working on that neurological component, which I think is kind of an interesting area where it seems to complement what you do in physiotherapy as well, because it does seem like there's there's the rehabilitation aspect of coming back from an injury isn't just purely about the physical rehab. There's that neurological component too, particularly if they've done something stupid like I did a couple of months ago, hurting a nerve in my neck. And I have to surprising how many of us have done this. And it's nothing with CrossFit specifically. It's that we as older athletes are challenging our bodies to do things that we don't normally have the ability to do. And so we expose ourselves to the same risk that a 20-year-old does, and it just happens to affect us a little bit differently.
But to be honest, I'd rather treat the 45-year-old that did something stupid at the gym and hurt themselves than the 45-year-old that's completely sedentary and has conditions that are due to sedentary lifestyle. It's easier to treat an athletic person, or at least an active person that's hurt themselves, than it is to try to get an unfit person that's unhealthy up to a level where they're going to live longer and function better. You can get back from a pinched nerve or a sprained shoulder or something, and you will get back from that. So it's a small price to pay to have less chance of a heart attack and chances of cancer and all those things. I'll take that.
Mike and I have talked about that a couple of times where, it's not just their ability to get back, but it's their mental fortitude and their attitude towards training themselves to come back from an injury. It's not like a workers' comp injury or an injury to someone that has been sedentary. When somebody hurts themselves, even if they do it outside the gym, but they are a regular gym goer, their priority is to get healthy quickly so that they can get back to that part of their routine. And so arguably anyway, even though they're stubborn as hell, they're also more likely to be compliant with what you're asking them to do. They're more likely to follow the protocol that you give them. And so that makes them a better patient in a roundabout way.
And ultimately, CrossFitters, runners, anyone who does any type of high-end training is used to training. So they're used to putting in hours a week. They're used to scheduling exercise in their life. So if they can't go to the gym because of an injury, we recommend that they should still go to the gym, but they're going to do it different. They're going to scale. They're going to do accessory work. You've got a lower limb injury. Well, start working on your upper extremities. Start working on your shoulder strength. Start working on your gymnastics. We have people at the gym that are hanging off the rig with a walking boot. And that's the type of population I think that you see in CrossFit, is that it's a part of their life. It might be their stress relief. It might be just their social life. It might be just their passion. So if you tell someone, hey, you got a walking boot, but we can still work on gymnastics. We can work on your pulling, your kipping, and your hanging. So let's keep you in the gym for an hour a day, but let's give you 20 minutes worth of physio exercises as accessory work that is going to help you progress as you go through.
Yeah.
Everyone in this room right now, unfortunately, has had a very similar neck injury. And all of us have had to work on different skills while we were rehabbing that injury. And, realistically, we probably all got better at some other skill.
Yeah, I was going to say that diverted focus I found fairly helpful.
Yeah.
It irritated me to not be able to do some of the things that I wanted to be able to do, but I did get stronger at some other things that I'd probably been a little lazy about focusing on.
Yeah, and you can clean up your technique if you have to slow down a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Very much so. Yeah. Especially when whatever it is, for me, like some of the little aches and pains that I've had along the way have only limited how much I could do, either in terms of volume or in terms of the load. I could still complete the full range of motion, which I felt was really helpful because then I was able to just kind of slow myself down, put the brakes on very deliberately, and get better at moving, whether it's moving the barbell or pulling myself up to the rig. Just anything that slowed me down actually made me better at it in the longer term anyway. So it was good to have that kind of check and balance.
And one of the really cool things about CrossFit is it's infinitely scalable. So you can go in there with any number of things and we can still make it look like pretty close to what other people are doing. So you come out feeling like, okay, I'm gassed, I'm pooped, I had a workout. It looked a little different, but it still looked like CrossFit.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't have to make it something completely different.
And the nice thing is, certainly with the CrossFit going patients, and even those that are just gym regulars, they are, compared to the regular population, more comfortable getting uncomfortable. So when you give someone exercises to do to rehab them, they don't always feel good when they're doing them. But they have to do them and recognize that they have to do them in order to be able to get back to full health. And with at least certainly with the CrossFit crowd, because it's really easy to pigeonhole us CrossFitters as being comfortable with getting uncomfortable. We do it every single day. That's the whole premise of the program is high intensity and short intervals makes you very uncomfortable, and then you recover and then you do something else. But it works. And so we're all very comfortable with that. We know that once we're done, it feels better and we get stronger and we do things more effectively. And so we see those results. So, whether it's in the gym or in a physiotherapy environment or in this weird amalgam with your clinic having a satellite office at the gym, both at the same time. So how did that come about? How did you wind up actually having your experience as a CrossFit athlete and your experience as physiotherapy clinic owners start crossing over in that way?
I think it happened fairly organically. When we started off at the gym, we actually didn't tell anyone we were physios because this was our escape from work, and it was their escape.
Why open the floodgates to all the questions?
And we didn't also want to look like we were ambulance chasers, going into a gym and trying to, drum up business because we heard that CrossFit can sometimes give you business. We went there completely personally for our own fitness and our own stress relief and all of those good things. But over time, as CrossFit does, you become a part of the community. You become friends with the people that you're sweating with every day.
Eventually, somebody asks you what you do.
Someone figures out what you do.
You can't hide it.
So you end up giving a little bit of advice here and there, and then someone asks you something else, and then all the coaches all of a sudden realize that you do know some stuff about bodies and that type of thing. So then there's just questions that came up. So as that went on, then we started seeing some of our community within our own clinics. And then it came down to a conversation with Rob and Tisha and said, what, we would love to be a bigger part of this gym. We went and did our L1, which was part of the reason we did L1. But we kind of wanted to be completely immersed into the sport and say, well, we're now have the ability to coach. We have the ability to treat the clients. How about we figure out a way that we can meld the two together and become coaches and physios and potentially kind of push information back and forth. We could teach the coaches some things about physiology and anatomy and rehab, and the coaches can teach us a lot of things about technique, which, it's a great relationship to go back and forth because I think we've become better physios because of the coaches that we work with. And hopefully at some point in time, the coaches are going to feel that they might have learned something from us, so.
Well, I can't speak for the rest of them, but I know myself, I certainly have seen the benefit in being able to just ask the odd question, particularly when it applies to analyzing movement, and knowing that some of your patients are in my classes as well, means that as long as they okay it, then we can share information back and forth, and they feel like they're being well looked after in both environments. And that's been really eye-opening for me, because there were people that I've always had athletes in my classes, particularly being responsible for the master's program, where everybody had a few different things that were going on, whether it was an ailment with their shoulder, they had a hip impingement or something along those lines. And, I learned over time, because it's not like I've done this for a really long time. I've been a coach in various different sports since I was 20. But, CrossFit is a very specific thing, and the movement patterns are very specific. And so being able to coach athletes that are a little bit older that have certain mobility issues was something that I had to learn how to do. And so having the ability to share knowledge back and forth with both of you has accelerated my ability to learn on the fly and apply some of those things in class in dealing with some of these athletes. And it helps that they come in so well informed because they're being treated by you, and the material so well, being CrossFit coaches and athletes yourselves. You're able to actively give them some specific things to do, to talk to the coach that's responsible for their class, so that we're not having to make things up on the fly. It's actually a two-way street, and we're able to discuss that with them and talk about what modifications to a movement they should be prioritizing because of how it fits into your overall treatment plan. And that presents a really unique opportunity, something that not every gym gets to be able to experience.
And it really is a two-way street. Like, we've learned a lot from the coaches in the gym too. We spend a lot of time asking questions ourselves of what's this supposed to look like and what's the ideal, because you don't learn that stuff in physio school. Like, we learn a little about movement, but that's stuff we've done in postgraduate work to really learn how to break down movement. But then to learn the movement of a clean and jerk, that's nothing we learn in physio school. So we need you guys. And so it being a two-way street, we know the joints and the muscles and how things should move, but you guys know what's that movement particularly supposed to look like. So it's been really helpful to kind of pick everybody's brain in the gym, and we've gotten a lot of information from a lot of people. Yeah,
and on the weightlifting side, having a coach like Isaac Smith in our gym coaching every day is a huge benefit, because
he's helped a lot.
The depth of knowledge that he has in weightlifting specifically as a coach. I mean, he's been a competitive coach for quite some time and a competitive athlete as well. And so anytime I have any questions whatsoever, I come to him. But more often than not, I just kind of sit at the back of the room and watch what he does when he coaches somebody in weightlifting, just to pick up some different ways of doing things, different cues, because there's always some different way that he describes it to somebody in order to get the response that he's looking for. So it winds up being pretty eye-opening. And I hope that all of us coaches get an opportunity to do that, to directly share information, but also to absorb information from one another by watching each of the other coaches do their thing, because we all have different ways of doing things.
Well, and it's cool as in physio, a lot of times it's kind of you're the person making the decisions and figuring out, can I go back to sport, or can they go back to sport now, or can they go back to work? And it's been kind of cool to not be the only person making those decisions. And so even for myself, like, I had a minor back injury, but it made me kind of have to shy away from deadlifts and back squats for a little while. And while that was happening, I was the patient. So I worked closely with Isaac, and we broke down my back squat and figured out my deadlift and kind of worked on bracing and all those little things that I can't find in myself. So it was nice to kind of flip the switch and be the patient, but still learn from it at the same time.
And I think just taking classes with everyone, and we've had the opportunity to work pretty close with Isaac on the weightlifting side. We've even brought in our entire staff to do a 6-week program on weightlifting, both as taking it as an athlete, but also learning the language, the lingo, the movements. And what was nice about it, we were able to sit down together and analyze someone's movement. And, in his eye, he's listening to the feet, the way the foot hits the floor. He's looking at where's the first pull, second pull, he's looking at it from a very technical point of view, whereas I was able to kind of look at it from a very anatomical and movement pattern. And we were able to talk back and forth, though we were using very different language.
Figured you might be.
It was the exact same thing.
Yeah.
We were looking at the same information, but coming at it slightly on two different angles, which I think is only going to benefit our athletes and each other, because the wealth of knowledge that the technical side of lifting, it's amazing. We've all hit plateaus and we think, oh, geez, is it that we're not strong? Oftentimes it's a technical side of it. If you've hit a plateau that you can't get by, check your technique.
Yeah.
And that's not something always that the physio is going to be able to do. That's something that the coaching staff is going to really tease out.
True.
We may be able to give accessory work to say, okay, maybe you're losing your overhead position because you've got a stiff upper back, or you've got lack of range of motion in your shoulders. And we can give those accessory movements, and we can do the hands-on skill to help regain that. But once they've got that new movement pattern, then they still have to learn how to work that technique with that new ability to move.
Right.
So if you're someone who struggles with an overhead squat because you've got no mobility in your upper back and your shoulders, if you somehow regain that, you still have to learn how to redo it with that new norm. So that's where the coaching staff really
That's for
comes in.
sure, because I did find, for me anyway, my upper shoulders were kind of the area where I didn't realize I had a range of motion issue coming from there. It was sort of upper lats and into the upper back. And so, my wingspan was fairly limited. And I had to go ridiculously wide on the bar in order to be able to get the bar in my center. But over time, I gradually worked on it and I was able to get there. Now I'm having to relearn the breathing and bracing as it applies to overhead squat as compared to back squat and front squat, because it's a totally different animal, much more core centric. And it requires a whole different bracing technique when you've actually got the bar in the right place, which makes a huge difference. My breathing and bracing was just try not to fall over because the bar was staying so far forward. Now that it stays where it's supposed to,
right,
I have to do it differently.
Well, and the fun thing about having the clinic in the gym is we can work with a person to get them to a certain point, but then they need to work on some stuff for a while. We don't need to see them every week or every couple of days. So that's where you guys can kind of help us get feedback. Like, okay, how are they doing? Is this looking easier? What do they look like under fatigue? So stuff that I can't see while I'm treating them, but like, what does it look like in the middle of a WOD?
That's true, because as a patient, we're not always good about coming in and describing the true conditions under which a movement is a problem. So I might be great at a back squat when I'm fresh, and my back squat could go just completely sideways on me when I'm fatigued. And so if it's part C of the workout and suddenly I'm doing back squat, I could compromise my form in a totally different way than if it was part A.
And that's where I find it helpful, because you guys will come to us and say, listen, so-and-so is something's going on with their front squat, blah, blah, blah. And then we know to kind of go in and look, or I've treated them. And then we've kind of gotten to the point where, hey, call me if you need me. And obviously they still need me. So where they might perceive this is better than it was, you guys perceive, well, it still could be a bit better.
A little bit more like seeing a wild animal in their natural habitat rather than seeing them in the zoo.
Everything looks better when your physio is looking at you. Posture.
Well, and the other side of it is being athletes within the same gym. So having a few different hats within the gym. You're working out next to people all the time, and you're seeing people do different positive movement patterns and negative movement patterns. So, you have that ability to kind of say, you've come in to see me because you do X, Y, and Z, but I noticed when you were doing your backs or your front squats the other day, you couldn't get your front rack position. And I'm identifying that this is coming from somewhere else. So you already have a much better idea of the patient who walks in through the door immediately. Normally, someone books in at the clinic, oftentimes you've never met them before.
Yeah, and you're having to rely on what they can tell you.
Right, so they come in and say, well, when I do this, it hurts, and when I do that, it hurts. Well, we already have an idea what's happening with the way you move or the way someone else in the clinic moves, because we've seen you for 3 years. We've seen your habits. We've seen your patterns. So it gives us a bit of an advantage being next to people every single day. Right? And you also get to kind of keep giving feedback throughout. We try not to kind of give feedback while we're doing our own workouts, but it happens. You might be doing a front squat in front of someone, you yell out at them, get your shoulders up or get your elbows up or whatever. Open your chest.
Knees out, something like that.
And that's pretty easy. And that's not something that's going to take away from our workout. But I think some of the athletes would kind of benefit and appreciate that. So.
Now, it's an interesting experience going in and talking to a physio that has an appreciation for, and further than that, an actual love for CrossFit, because it's not universal in that regard. So one of the things that was really kind of interesting is a couple of months ago, you organized and brought in an expert in this bridging between CrossFit and physiotherapy. And there were a lot of physios that came to that continuing education course that was aimed at physios, but CrossFitters were in the room as well, most of us coaches. And Judy Gelber came in and gave us a really interesting opportunity to kind of bridge the gap. We were able to talk about movement in terms that are more common in the physiotherapy realm, but also address what they're universally called in the CrossFit world, and talk about how these things can complement one another. And it seemed like that was in an effort to ensure that physios that hadn't previously had any exposure, not any direct hands-on exposure to CrossFit, could appreciate where that type of workout, that functional fitness kind of approach fits in somebody's everyday. I've certainly gone to physiotherapists in the past that when presented the opening of it hurts when I do this, the question is usually, well, why are you doing that? Not why do you want to continue to do that, or would you like to continue to do that? How should we change your movement so that you can get back to that? And it seems like the physios that appreciate CrossFit are going to ask that latter question a little bit more readily. Is that something that you're experiencing? You're connected with a lot of physios, both in the CrossFit world and outside the CrossFit world. How much of a misunderstanding might there be among physiotherapists as to what this functional fitness craze is, and in particular with CrossFit? Are we all putting ourselves at unnecessary risk, or are we doing good for our bodies?
I think it's very misunderstood. I think you could pose a question to 15 physios in a room one evening, and you're going to have a lot of differing opinions. I found myself almost defending what I do and why I do it, because people say, CrossFit is going to injure you. It's too intense. It's this, it's that, and the other thing. But what's interesting about it is the loudest naysayers when it comes to CrossFit and physio are usually the ones that don't understand what CrossFit is even about. So they have this preconceived notion of what we do and what we don't do, and they are very vocal about it. But if you really ask them the question, what do we do? Why do we do it? How do we get there? They don't understand that. All they see is Matt Fraser throwing, sandbags up over a wall to complete exhaustion, but he's a different animal. He's at a higher level than any of us are ever going to be at. So when we look at our CrossFit gym and we say, probably our oldest athlete is 70 and our youngest is 14. There's
12 now.
12. So there's a huge diverse range of people in there. And so when it comes to that discussion, I often find myself to a certain degree trying to educate people. And I try not to sound defensive, but you're educating them to say, well, these exercises aren't bad. These are a great set of exercises that can be progressively loaded, and they can be scaled to your ability and your function and your injury level and your health level. So if people saw that, they would understand the connection with physio and CrossFit. It is very stepwise progressions. You learn the most basic of skill and then you build upon it, which is no different than what we do in a treatment point of view. If we're going to treat someone's knee, we need to do the most basic of exercises and then start to move into a more technical exercise, into a more functional exercise. And that's what we do. So, it is about getting the word out there and trying to educate people on the benefits of it, not only from an aesthetic point of view and a strength point of view, but also the metabolic point of view and the health components that come with CrossFit. So I think there's a lot to be learned about it. And I think part of our job in the next number of years is to try and push that forward and let them know that there is more to it than just handstand push-ups and muscle ups. Yeah. There's a lot that goes between there before you get to that level.
That's for sure.
Well, I think too, when you're looking for a physio, you want somebody that's going to invest in you too. So if it's somebody that just says, don't do that, they haven't invested in your sport. I've started my career treating a lot of runners, and now I treat a lot of runners and CrossFitters, and they have the same brain. And if you say don't do it, it's devastating. It's their social life, it's their activity, it's their fitness.
Yeah, it's more than just their workout, that's for sure.
It's wrapped up into your whole life. Part of it is your identity too. And if you say don't do that, that is catastrophic to some people. So if you don't have a physio that's willing to invest some time to figure out what your sport is, whether it is CrossFit or running or fencing, if they can't figure out what your movement patterns are and at least give you some form of that to keep working on, then they haven't invested the time in their patient and individualize that program as much as they said they did.
Right.
So whether it is somebody that specializes in CrossFit or you're a fencer and you need somebody to help you with the movement, you don't necessarily have to specialize, but you need to put the time in to figure out what that sport is and what it involves and break it down to its basic components.
And CrossFit, to one degree or another, is probably the least specialized of sports because it's basically everything. Whatever you pick up could be something that you might have to use.
If you say don't do it, you've done no homework to help your patient. Yeah. There's something they can do.
Yeah, it's different than a truly specialized sport where there's one particular aspect of body mechanics that is going to be repeated. Yeah. In CrossFit, we run, we throw, we pick up, we put down, we climb up. I mean, there's any number of different modalities that are thrown at us. And so, you could really make an argument that there's not too many things that a CrossFitter won't be tasked with doing over the course of, let's say, 6 months to a year in their initial experience in CrossFit. And it's just going to keep climbing as their abilities grow, their strength and conditioning grows, and their confidence level winds up changing as well.
On the flip side of that too, it means that now you've got this infinite number of things that you could get them to do. Yeah. Your own imagination is your limiter. Yeah. So if you can't think of something, you're not thinking hard enough. There are so many things and so many steps to every single thing that there is some version of that they can do.
Yeah. Yeah, if I'm a pinch hitter in baseball and I can't do that anymore, there's fewer options for me than if I'm a CrossFitter.
Archery, it's a little tougher. Yeah. And even running. I have to get down into their training program. That's where most of the science in physio comes with runners. I look at their gait, we work at their movement, strengthen, but you got to look at their programming. Yeah. So CrossFit, at least with their programming, there's some way you can make it fit into their program.
Well, and more specialized sports have started to adopt cross training as a component of their training programs so that they're not as specialized. They still have a focus, but they recognize that these other means of training complement their overall fitness level and their strength and conditioning level to be able to perform at the high level in that specialized sport.
We have rigs and barbells and plates in the gym, and my runners deadlift and squat. And you can steal a lot from CrossFit.
So when you became athletes in CrossFit, how much of your experience as physiotherapists came into play with your everyday approach to working out? I mean, did it spoil it for you, knowing that you had such knowledge that you were going to apply and you couldn't just check that part of your brain off when you were working out, or were you successful in turning that off and just going for gusto?
I think, or was it somewhere between? Turn that off pretty easily.
Well, yeah, that's true.
2 minutes in, it's gone. Much like my ability to count.
But I think I also use it as an advantage because I actually started to use my physio brain to kind of dissect why a board looked the way that it did. Why are we doing this exercise followed by this exercise and this exercise? So I kind of nerded out a little bit on the movement pattern.
Oh, yeah.
I always love seeing the connections. Why are we doing a skier? Well, that lat pull is going to help us with our toe to bar. It's going to help us with our muscle ups. Why are we doing atomic sit-ups? Well, it's an awful lot like our toe to bar, knee to elbows. Yeah. when we're using a rower, when we push with our legs and then come in through with our arms, it's awful lot like snatching from a floor.
Yeah. More evidence that there's like 5 or 6 different ways to accomplish the same sort of thing that all lead to one destination.
So it became really interesting for me to dissect the movements and dissect the exercises and see how the program is really developed and really built, because there's so much in common with different movements, and you can see how one leads to the other and helps with the next. Your ground to overhead is going to help you with your cleans. So that to me was really fun to dissect and apply my knowledge as a physio and with anatomy and physiology, and then meld it with fitness. From an athletic point of view, I think one of the benefits for me coming into it as a physio is that I also came in there with a bit of a healthy paranoia. So my first 3 months, I wanted to lift heavier than I did, but I didn't, because I was always still in the back of my head. I listened to the people who said you're going to get injured in CrossFit. So I took that to heart, and I started off very, very slowly, and I was paranoid at the beginning. And I think it benefited me, though, because I didn't stack weights on, and I learned technique better than I probably would have if I just went for gusto.
Right.
So I think all in all, it was a positive experience for me, anyone being a physio coming into this, because there are so many similarities with the two fields.
Yeah. Now, you've both seen patients that have, no experience with CrossFit, and you've seen now many patients that have been doing CrossFit for quite some time. Mm-hmm. Are those populations wildly different from one another in terms of what limitations they might commonly have, or are there some similarities as well?
I think there's definitely a lot of differences and similarities. Our general population, our general clients that come in through the clinic, they're often coming in because they did something. They had a trauma or they had an overuse injury, whereas our CrossFitters, it is similar. They're going to have overuse, overtraining. They might have done something on a box jump that made them have a traumatic injury. I think the biggest difference, and we talked about this before, was anyone who trains, whether it be a CrossFitter or a runner or any type of training discipline, the one big thing that they have different than a lot of our other population is that time concentrated on getting better, putting a schedule, time for themselves, working on the education, working on the exercises, working on improving themselves in some way. So I think that's the biggest difference that I see with my CrossFit athletes versus my general population. Yeah. The other big thing is they love their sport. They love their activity. So it's really easy to motivate someone to get better when it means that they can go back to doing what they love.
It's a fatter carrot on the end of the stick.
Absolutely. So if you don't have that as a general population, someone who hurts their neck sitting at a computer all day,
can I go back to sitting at my computer?
Right.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I guess you'd be a little less enthusiastic under those circumstances.
Right. So oftentimes what you're doing is trying to circumvent that idea and say, well, what do you love? Oh, I'm a golfer. Great. Well, who cares about your computer? Let's get you back on the golf course.
True. Yeah.
So you just try and use a little bit of psychology to get you back in, but you don't need that psychology as much for CrossFitters. Yeah. You say, do you want to get back in the gym? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's do it. Right.
Yeah. It's no mystery what they're looking to get back to do.
Right.
The CrossFitters, too, also have there's a high-end technical component to some of the movements. So they're used to being coached and like nitpicking and working their way through a skill. And they're used to that high-level skill that when you add exercises or change something up or teach them something, they generally catch on pretty quickly. Not to say that the average person can't, but CrossFitters tend to, I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining things.
They've had a lot of experience having those things described to them.
Yeah, so they're generally good movers. And like the 40, 50, 60-year-olds move more like 20, 30, 40-year-olds than they do like their peers. Yeah, and especially as you age further, the gap between you and the sedentary individual becomes an abyss.
Well, yeah, and that was going to be something that I was going to ask next, because I mean that's certainly something that anecdotally I've observed in working with the Masters crew. Despite the fact that most of them have been doing CrossFit for a while, some of them are new entrants to the CrossFit world, and so I get to see at least an inkling of some of what you might see in that somebody that hasn't been physically active for a number of years because life has gotten in the way, they've been busy having kids and jobs and all these things that get in the way of physical fitness. And then when they finally return to that physical world, there are certain muscle groups that tend to suffer a little more than others. Like I've seen a lot of core instability with athletes because they sit for a living. Let's say that was my case coming into the gym. I sat at a computer for a living for 20 years, and so that took its toll. That's why I had shoulders like a T-Rex, and I couldn't really sit up properly, and so my overhead squat took a long time.
Well, you can't squish your glutes for 10 hours a day and expect them to bust out a stability exercise for you later. That comes with a cost.
Yeah. So are you finding that there's like a somewhat standard library of things that you have to prescribe to somebody that comes in that's of a certain age, let's say, that you might not have to prioritize for somebody that's a little bit younger? Or is the hunched over a phone thing just bringing that down another generation?
I think for us,
happening earlier. Yeah.
I think for us, we look at movement patterns. So really, it doesn't matter if you're 65 or if you're 16. If you've got a bad movement pattern, we try and correct that pattern as much as we can.
Right. We just measure our expectations on range of motion. Right. That would be the biggest thing. I think that you're going to get stiffer as you age. That doesn't mean you have to be unable to move. It just means we can't expect you to look like a 20-year-old in your shoulder movement or your hip movement. We know there's a certain, there's bookends. There's a range of motion that's normal for 60, 70-year-olds versus 20, 30-year-olds.
Fortunately, a floating target, though, too, if you're willing to put in the work.
Absolutely. But there is still a little bit of a hard end of we're not going to expect you to get your ankles around your ears if you're 70.
No.
Right?
But you do look at, I tell my patients all the time, there is no ceiling on strength. So there's never a bad time to start strengthening. You can always get stronger.
And balance.
And balance and core. Yes, there's going to be some degenerative changes in the 65 category that isn't there in the 25 category. You work around it, but that's the beauty of CrossFit. You scale appropriately. Yeah. As long as the person is doing the depth of their movement that they possibly can have, and we keep working towards getting them deeper or getting them higher, as long as they're feeling good and their movement pattern and their technique is sound, then I don't think there's a ceiling. But we do have to be cognizant of what happens to degenerative changes and what patterns we should avoid. Mm-hmm. You're not going to try and tell a 75-year-old to get into the most back extended position that they possibly can, because they might not get there. Yeah. Their hips may have some degenerative changes. They might not get as deep because of their hips or their knees, but it doesn't mean we stop trying.
And they still need to deadlift. Their groceries still end up on the floor. They got to get them from the floor to the counter. We don't want that to be the heaviest thing they lift in their day.
For sure.
So, it's the strength, like Mike said, there's infinite ability to get stronger as you age.
And knowing how to safely move that load is something that I think is an undervalued skill that they wind up learning just by doing in CrossFit. Fine. Their groceries are not attached to a barbell, but that's not the point. They learn how to bend over properly and load the legs and pick up without using their back. And these are all, those are skills as much as they are strengths that they're picking up by practicing these movements. And not everybody recognizes that because all they see is barbell. And they think that, that doesn't apply to real life. But it really does. It's the one implement that we can overload to train for lifting the groceries or lifting their laundry. And, if it's a full load of wet clothes, it's not going to be 5 pounds. So, you better be prepared for that and lift safely, or you could wind up having to go to see Physio just by virtue of having done your laundry.
Or even the ability to continue to do your laundry and go get your own groceries. It keeps you independent for much longer.
Yeah, that's a big functional factor for a lot of people. And we have quite a few older athletes that at our gym. I'm not the least bit worried about any of them living independently. They're incredible.
Right. One of my favorite patients is 73, and she comes to see me at the gym. She's a runner, but she comes to see me at the gym, and we do pretty much everything that we would do with anybody of any age. She's phenomenal. Wow. And she does not show any signs of any chance of her being dependent on anybody for anything.
Right.
So So it's really cool to work with her because she's like, okay, what's next? I'm ready to go.
But you see it changing even in the clinic. Since we've become CrossFitters and kind of learning more about it, I am changing the way that I treat patients. And I do have patients doing different things. And what I find interesting about it is for so many years, we were doing the kind of boring physio exercises that everyone hated and no one was compliant with them and they didn't see the purpose of them. Now they're out in the gym and they're lifting kettlebells and they're walking around carrying things over their head and they're doing deadlifts with a barbell. And it's exciting for people who have been fairly sedentary to say they get to go home and tell their wives or tell their husbands that they've been able to do this and that at Physio. And that's exciting for them. And it increases their compliance level. They buy in way quicker and it's fun.
And you can sneak a few physio exercises in there and
they don't even notice.
Right. They'll be more compliant with them because the fun stuff's there too.
Yeah. It's the peas hidden in the cake.
Right.
Totally.
Eat your broccoli.
So one of the interesting programs that I've seen happen in the States, and I'm still I'm trying to get CrossFit HQ to answer some of my questions about this because I'd love to know a little bit more about their thinking on the MDL1. Which is really just the L1, but for a medical audience. Now, you guys come from a subspecialty of medicine that is easily related, and you've gone through the L1 program. Again, the MDL1 is actually not any different. It's the regular L1 program that all of us coaches do, but the intended audience is that much more medically educated crowd that, obviously it influences how they view the material the same way as it has influenced you. So when you did your L1, what were your expectations going in? I mean, you had already had a considerable exposure as athletes and being, key parts of the community in talking to the coaching staff at Osprey already. Did that change your experience? I mean, you didn't do it with a whole other group of physios or anything. You just went in and did your L1 with a more general
We were the
coaching
only two
population.
physios, I think, yeah.
Yep.
We went in with a bit more knowledge, I think, than the average person, only because you guys enlightened us as to what to expect. Right. So I don't think there was anything that was terribly surprising.
Right.
You set us up for success.
But it was a great course. I really enjoyed it because it did allow us to kind of get outside of our own physio box and use lingo more that the coaches are using. And in some cases, it was easier language because coaches are talking to other athletes and they're not trying to prove their knowledge from a medical point of view.
Well, and the L1 staff have a very polished, prepared way of delivering
one of the
CrossFit
tightest,
HQ's information.
It's one of the tightest courses I've ever seen, right down to the minute. And each one of the instructors were amazing. So I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. I actually used some of the information that I got on the course with my patients on a daily basis. Yeah. I think our benefit coming into it was we're used to watching people move. So when we're watching, when we're doing the exam, it was a little easier for us to kind of identify what some of the faults may have been.
Yeah, I'm sure the angle of the photo doesn't influence your ability to see what's going on there. That was one thing that tripped me up a couple of times, was that the chosen angle on the photo that we were tasked with analyzing, that wouldn't be the angle I would stand at in order to see what they were asking me to look for. But that's my comparatively untrained eye looking for what they were looking for. But yeah, I mean, it was a very well structured program. I couldn't believe how smoothly it ran.
And even like the idea of putting a workout in the middle of a course, so simple, but so brilliant. Because in the afternoon, that's when we all fade. We've eaten lunch and everybody starts to
just how sharp were you that afternoon as a result?
Right. And as a physio, we promote health and wellness and activity. Why have we not thought to put a mini workout in the middle of a course?
Yeah.
So it was kind of unique to be wait, there's more to the fitness side of things that health could use, crosstalk.
I'm delivering a marketing lecture to the Massage Therapists Association in Nova Scotia next month, and I'm tempted just to have everybody drop and give me 10 burpees somewhere around the midpoint to make sure that everybody's still awake, because it really does seem to work.
Yeah. But I think the CrossFit L1 course was really it's really important, and I think with the MDL1, to show others what it's all about, to show that it is a polished program, to show where it came from, where it's going, what are the principles behind it. Because what I found about the L1 course that I didn't expect was the background knowledge and why are we doing things, and the more health exposure side of it as opposed to lifting barbells and kettlebells. So I think from an MDL1 point of view, I think it's really important to get the medical community on board. If I had one wish, I would include physios and other healthcare providers within that MDL1. Right now, it's, as far as I know, and I tried to find out a little bit more information on it today, was, as far as I know, it's only for physicians.
And only in the States at the moment, too,
States.
which is something I've been trying to get some answers about as well.
Right. So I think from an exposure point of view, yes, you got to start with the physicians, and I think they're a very, very important piece of this puzzle. But what's also very important is the healthcare practitioners who work with the athletes and work with other clients all the time. We have such influence on our patients, and our ability to kind of tell people that it's okay to deadlift. We're spending an hour with them or 45 minutes with them, and we're showing them things. And we may see them over a 3-month period or 4-month period, and we build up a rapport and we build up a trust level. So though I think is very important within that kind of hierarchy to have the medical physicians to be involved and for them to be part of the gatekeepers to get people into it and let them know it's not a bad sport. I think the other healthcare providers, whether it be physios, chiros, massage, nurses, whatever, we all have our role in expanding this sport and this methodology, because we are the ones that are talking a lot and we spend more time with those patients. We aren't seeing them for 5 or 10 minutes and they're out the door. We're with them for months at times. So
that may be where the difference really lies too, because the MDs and the nurses, to at least kind of a similar degree, a principal focus of their training is the drug market that's there to try to stem the various different ailments that people have. Whereas in your specialty, you deal with the physical body, and that would apply to chiro as well. And so that area of specialization, I think the ideas that are presented in CrossFit's environment and in its formalized training are far less foreign and don't fly in the face of the type of training that you do to the same degree that they would in that traditional medicine environment, where pharmacology is hundreds of hours of training and physical fitness is zero. Or arguably anyway, doesn't. I mean, I asked my daughter who finished her nursing program just a year and a half ago, and they got nothing on physical fitness. She recognizes its role. She's CrossFitting with me now. And for her, it's about staying safe to be able to help other people move in her job.
Because her job's not getting any lighter.
No, that's something that she's commented on, is that the patients that they're seeing, especially in the surgical ward that she works in, are commonly coming in. They're already sick. They're in many cases, they're out of shape. And by the time they've had surgery, they're not in a position to help themselves get out of bed and move to the bathroom or move from one bed to another. And so the nurses are being tasked with deadlifting humans. And they're not prepared to do that. And so physical fitness is a matter of her being prepared for her job, but she also sees the role that it could potentially play in patients' lives too.
And there is a push within the medical profession of the doctors know that exercise is medicine. They know depression. It helps with depression. It helps with heart disease. It helps with many different conditions. But they haven't been given the skill set to prescribe it or to tell people what to do. And so they're busy. They have their practices are outrageously busy. So they don't also have time to sit and say, what do you like to do? How much time do you have? And give them any major specifics. So having the MDL1, something like that, at least it gives them exposure to say, okay, this is an option. And here are the people that can control the dosage and the movement patterns. That's cool. I'm going to send you here, or these physios can kind of help with that. So at least they're still the gatekeepers, but they're gatekeepers with lots of knowledge.
And we try to do that within our own community. We've done a talk with a group of physiatrists in one of the hospitals here in Halifax, and we try to educate them on shoulder injuries, but we put it in a slant of CrossFit. So we kind of snuck in there. We were talking about anatomy and physiology and rehab, but we also talked about these are some of the things that occur from a movement point of view. And we used a couple of case studies from CrossFit and just more of exposure. Let people know that it isn't a bad word and that it is, you've got a bunch of physios who really enjoy it and buy into it and are using it. And we use it with our patients all the time. So it's about exposure. Get it out there. Get people aware that it exists and it's not a bad thing.
And remind them that it's a controlled thing. They're in the presence of a coach.
That's true. I mean, it's not like in CrossFit you're left to your own devices.
Right. I've seen dumber things in like a regular gym because nobody's stopping you.
Yeah.
I tried to do something dumb at the gym. You would stop me.
Right. That's true. That's true. In the Globo gym, somebody's more likely to whip out a phone and put it on YouTube.
Hey, that's cool. Right. Take some more dumbbells on top of that ball. But yeah, so the Netflix documentaries are cool, but I don't think they helped us in terms of like making it less scary for the average human.
Yeah, there's a small sliver of the population for whom those documentaries will be aspirational, and then it'll scare the crap out of a big chunk of the rest of the audience. But that's because they don't have the requisite knowledge to see what that level of movement represents. Yeah, and the funny thing is nobody sees themselves in pro hockey players or pro football players that make some amazing catch, flipping backwards over top of a 6-foot-tall man, landing on their head and getting up to do it again. And yet, when they see a CrossFit documentary, like, well, that's crazy. I can't do that. Well, yeah, okay. But you do say you go out and you play football or you go out and play the Gentlemen's Hockey League and you try to play just like Sidney Crosby, but you don't do the requisite training. You don't have a coach guiding you there. So in which are you at more risk?
They walk in thinking that they'd walk into the gym and it would be a gym full of like the Daughters and Matt Frasers. When it's average people. We all look like anybody you'd run into in a mall.
Yeah. You're both part of a physio group on Facebook with a variety of physios around the world that are involved in CrossFit. Do you engage in conversations with people around the world that are in kind of a similar situation where they are CrossFit athletes, but they are also physios?
Yeah. The group is still fairly young. We're still adding members all the time, so we kind of invite other physios who do CrossFit as often as we can and as often as we think about it. A lot of the page right now is a situation where people are asking recommendations on a good gym to send someone to because they're moving to this town, or maybe it might be a suggestion of, hey, I got this patient who just got out of a Bankart lesion shoulder repair. What are some scaling ideas or that type of thing? So I think it is a really great website. It's a great resource. There's a lot of people that will post different rehab exercises or progressions and that type of thing.
There's been a couple of case queries of like, hey, I've got this thing that I'm kind of stuck now. Does anybody have any suggestions of how to proceed from here with my patient? So that's pretty cool.
It's nice that those queries are being made within an environment of arguably everybody in that environment is all educated. I'm part of a couple of other CrossFit Masters groups where everybody has wildly different levels of experience and education, and those same what if questions come up. And so the degree of response is very high, but the depth of the response is usually pretty shallow because they're not people that have a tremendous amount of background in a particular area. So it's interesting that you as professionals are able to share that kind of information back and forth with a degree of confidence because everybody in there is within the same profession.
And we travel to St. Louis once or twice a year to study at Washington University. And they're a very movement-based university. But when we go there, there's people from Japan and Denmark and all over the world. And a lot of them have either CrossFit exposure or weightlifting exposure or different sports. And it's really cool to see how, like, there was a guy from Denmark and he was talking about, like, his son is, I can't remember what his sport was, but it was not CrossFit. It was like volleyball or paddling or something. I don't remember. But like how much Olympic lifting they were using to train these kids. And so like the discussions happen there very much. And it's that group is very unique in that it's very movement based. So it's very cool to kind of listen in and get some tips and tricks and share some ideas. And it's all kind of got a CrossFit kind of swing to it, or weightlifting or movement.
And that's where we met Judy, and how we got involved with Judy. And Judy was I think she spearheaded the CrossFit and Physio Facebook site. So I think she's one of the administrators. So, that group itself I think it's got a lot of potential, and I think it's been great for the last year or so, but I think it's going to get bigger and better. Because it's also a pretty safe environment. People are not judgmental. They're in it to absolutely help each other. You know what I mean? So no question is a bad question, and there's lots of great advice that's getting thrown around there.
Right.
There's some CrossFit athletes who are physios that are on that Facebook page. So there's a lot of congratulations after the open or after the games.
Right.
So it's kind of a great meeting place when we don't get to know these people on a personal basis, but we can throw out our ideas and just share banter about different experiences that we've all had. So I think it's great.
Yeah, and the course that she held here was excellent. I mean, I'm curious to know if it'll wind up coming back so that even more people can be involved in this opportunity to kind of share knowledge between trainers and physios, and give physios some exposure to more of the functional fitness side, and for us to gain a better appreciation for what we have to be looking for, so that we know, is this something, can we address this as a trainer, or do we need to be looking to a physio to take the next steps and look after this person professionally as well. So to wrap up, now that both of you are more than dipping your toe in having your physio world meet with your CrossFit world, where do you see it going from here? I mean, what do you envision, without necessarily showing your cards, but how do you envision this progressing? What's the evolution that you see for your practice as it relates to your CrossFit going patient group?
I think ultimately we want to just work more hand in hand with coaches and athletes all together. So, as physios for 15 years, we've worked very independently. We work with other physios within our practice, and we talk about cases all the time, but ultimately your decisions are your decisions, and really you don't get any feedback from anyone or any help from anyone. I think our goal is to work with all, the entire CrossFit community of Halifax, and potentially, the province of Nova Scotia. We would like to be heavily involved in Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit, and talking back and forth to coaches a lot. Be able to be consultants when it comes to injury prevention, injury rehab, scaling options, education, whatever it may be. So I think we want to spread the word that it is a safe sport, and then try and be involved in it, not as a single entity, but more as a group that kind of works together to make all of us a little bit better from an athletic point of view, from a coaching point of view, and from a health point of view.
Yeah.
And just to keep the fun in our job. So doing something that doesn't seem like work makes it easier to get to your long game. I
suppose it would, yeah. And I mean, you also get this kind of unusual benefit compared to many other physios. You get to see your patients arguably years after they've finished seeing you for treatment.
Yeah.
And see that they're still doing well, and they're still progressing in their sport, and
hitting new PRs, or getting that movement that was such a struggle. And that's really rewarding. Even if I played a small role in it, you kind of like, oh, great. You're invested a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, if you're how they got back to training in the first place, then you play a much bigger role than I think most people would even necessarily appreciate at the time, because everything that follows can't happen unless they get back to their training. That's in no small part based on the knowledge that you've come into this with, but also your appreciation and understanding for the sport that they love, which makes a big difference to their ability to getting back to regular training.
Mm-hmm. It's also cool too to work in the gym and wear leggings and t-shirts to work
and listen to loud music that we don't really care if anyone's offended by it.
Sneakers, it's great.
It is it's a much more casual environment, and it gives us diversity within our jobs. everyone's complaint about their job is they go in Monday to Friday and they do the same thing every day. Now, we're lucky in our profession that we don't do the same thing every day.
Right.
Every single person that walks in the clinic is very, very different. Every day is different than the day before, which is very similar to CrossFit, I guess. But it's also nice to break up the clinical to the gym setting. So wearing our sneakers and t-shirts and shorts and, not being as prim and proper as we would be in professional in the clinic. Not that we're unprofessional, but it's a looser environment.
So I get to run around and stuff with patients, like jump in on parts of their, I guess workout we'll call it, but part of their rehab. It's really fun. Yeah. And it's nice to work out next to them while they're working through something. So they're not just the one in the clinic doing the exercises. I'm in there too sometimes. So it's fun. It keeps the energy level high.
And like anything, we talk about our community and how it's pretty great to sweat together and work out together and hurt together and all that stuff. But when you're telling a patient that they need to do X, Y, and Z, and then they show up at the gym and they watch you do X, Y, and Z, it's instant buy-in, right? Because you are practicing what you preach, and you are sweating and dying just as much as they are. So it's rewarding in that sense, but it's also it's a two-way street for sure. So your patients kind of buy in and appreciate the effort that you're putting in.
Now, does that make you self-conscious at all, that that the athletes are watching and they know that you know how to move properly?
Don't,
because I know as a coach it makes me really self-conscious, so it's got to be doubly hard for you guys.
It depends on what the workout is.
I try not to think about it.
So you usually lose yourself within the workout anyway. So I don't. I usually don't think about it too much.
I know I'm trying to steal every little bit of each of your warm-ups. I'm watching. I'm watching you two. I'm watching Brittany. I'm watching Grace, and I'm just stealing every little bit of your warm-ups to make sure that I go in as loose as possible before I have to do something crazy. Mm-hmm. It's helping.
Good.
Well, thank you both for humoring me and chatting through your entire progression from high school through to being professional physios that CrossFit. I hope that everybody listening will have gotten an opportunity to hear some little tidbit of information that they didn't know about you, first of all, but gained a better understanding and an appreciation for how your profession and what we as CrossFit trainers do complement one another, so that they can, better understand that there's a role for each of these different types of training, and they can know when they should be, talking to somebody about true rehabilitation as opposed to just pushing through their training, because that's the mistake that I've made a few times, and I know better now, and that's definitely to do with you guys being around, making sure that I know better.
We've all been there.
Thank you both.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you.
Time for the AMRAP up for this episode. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mike and Anita as much as I did. I can't help but geek out a little on the topic since I've developed such a keen interest in how their way of analyzing movement can apply to coaching. It's been a fascinating time working with them to absorb as much knowledge as I can and find ways to apply it. I have athletes in my classes, particularly in master's class, that have increased their range of motion significantly in the months they've been in the gym, or developed new skills and new strengths, and they very often tell me about how it has affected their ability to move outside the gym as well. And it's pretty rewarding to hear these stories, and incorporating what I'm learning from Mike and Anita, as well as Brittany, another physiotherapist from their practice that we also mentioned during our interview, who's also an athlete at Osprey. Well, it's invaluable. It definitely helps me add to my skills as a coach and as an athlete. A few links for you to check out for things that we discussed in the episode. First, we mentioned Judy Gelber, who runs Forward Movement Analysis and Rehabilitation. She ran the excellent movement analysis for the Functional Fitness Athlete course that many of us attended at Osprey back in June of this year. And it's a course that she travels with periodically. You can learn more at forwardmovement.me, and forward is FWD, and then movement.me. There are links to her Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram on that site as well. We also talked about the Physios in CrossFit Facebook group. Now, it's a private group, so while you can search it up, you have to request access to join it, and it is a closed group specifically intended for the physiotherapy professionals out there. It's worth searching up for sure, and Judy Gelber, who I just mentioned, is one of the founders and administrators of that group. Another group that Mike and Anita and I have talked about and is worth mentioning, even though we only glanced over it in our discussion, is a group called PT on Ice, and the ICE stands for Institute of Clinical Excellence. They too conduct seminars and continuing education courses, both online and live in person. But interestingly, they also have a podcast called PT on Ice, and they're relatively short episodes on a specific topic, and they're really interesting to listen to, and really dive deeper into some of the subjects that we touched on in our interview. You can learn more by searching for their podcast on your favorite podcasting platform, and you can visit ptonice.com. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about Mike and Anita's practice, you can find them online at beaverbankphysiotherapy.com and youngkempt.physiotherapy.com. That's KEMPT, physiotherapy.com. Or follow them on Instagram or Facebook. If you search for them by either of those practice names, you'll find them on both of those platforms. If you like this episode, please consider writing a review on iTunes, like user Megbar1979, who I believe is a fellow member of the CrossFit Linchpin private track community with me. After my last episode, she wrote, "Great informative podcast for those with an interest in all things CrossFit." I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I hope to share more reviews in my next AM Wrap-Up. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you automatically receive my next episode when I'm joined by another exciting guest to talk about fitness and health. You can also visit my website at boxjumper.ca and sign up for my mailing list. I'm working on some exclusive content for members of my emailing list, so be sure to add yours very soon. Thanks for tuning in. Some great fitness discussions are on the way. Until next time, get out there and move. Stay healthy, WOD happy, and WOD often.